Welcome back to the JSOU Forum. We're going to continue the program this afternoon with a panel led by Mr. Keith Lawless, who's the former Deputy J2 here at U.S. Special Operations Command. And we've asked him to describe the role of intelligence in supporting influence operations and activities. The aim of this panel is to draw out the intelligence role to enable SOF to effectively conduct influence operations in a saturated information environment. Just a reminder to everyone, all of these sessions are conducted at the unclassified level, so please be mindful of that. Additionally, this is a large panel with lots of great expertise. So I want to turn the floor to Mr. Lawless and express our appreciation to all the panelists for taking up this challenge. The floor is yours.
So I've listened on and off the last 2 days of some of the presentations, and of course, General Nagata and Admiral Green. It reminds me of the old days. It was great to see those two tremendous leaders. And I think they touched upon a lot of the things that you're going to hear about today. No, I think there were very few references to intelligence. One of the previous panels today did talk a lot about signals intelligence, about intelligence support, but there's a lot of implied tasking there for intelligence. So I'm not an academician, I'm an intelligence officer. So I've lived in this world. It's very difficult from a messaging perspective and influence operations, but we got a great group here to get through this. The one thing I want to make sure that it is unclassified, and we may delve on some sensitive issues, but we're not going to go down the classified realm. But I do want to make sure that we do stay in the sort of in the soft forum. Even though this goes well beyond SOF, goes well beyond the Department of Defense, and it goes well beyond even our Five Eyes partners. So Intel is really, it's certainly a critical capability, and it could be a center of gravity when it comes to these influence activities. So I'd like to, I was also the Deputy J2 of NORTHCOM and NORAD for a period of time. And just to give you a little bit of a scene setter, General Clark, the previous SOCOM commander, came out to see General Van Herk, who is the current NORTHCOM commander, who is by design and charter, he is responsible for deterrence, strategic deterrence against North America. So when General Clark came out, he really did talk about the relevance of special operations in imposing cost, denying benefit, and effectively messaging, certainly China, relative to its expanding coercive and corrosive influence across Africa, primarily, certainly Asia, but really around the globe. And he also discussed countering Russian intentions to dominate the Arctic region. And he wanted to do that by ramping up our influence activities. So he thought messaging was the key, as did General Van Herk, and that part of that message should include our values as Western nations, that they are central to having an effective influence effort across the world. And then General Fenton, just 2 months ago, came by. I'm also in a counterintelligence course, and we had the opportunity to have the new SOCOM commander come over. And he admonished everybody in the room and said, don't go back to our corners. We have to be much more proactive in the future. He has a bias for action. He wants to be innovative and bold as it relates to SOF's approach to influencing the behavior and actions of our potential adversaries. So you can see that sort of sets the tone for where SOF is going, or SOCOM, the SOCOM enterprise is going to go in the future relative to this effort. What complicates it, obviously, is the multi-domain aspect of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well when we get into the cyber aspects of it. The one thing I would be remiss if I, as an intel officer, just to let you know, I read the People's Liberation Army Daily from January 19, 2021. And in there, it says, the era of steel hitting steel has passed, and modern warfare is a contest between systems and systems. So you can sense that my focus is always on wearing the red hat and looking at a potential adversary. So the Chinese, and I think was mentioned in one of the earlier panels, they view us as a declining power. They don't want to fire a shot. They don't want us to be able to project force into the South China Sea. So what is the SOF role as it relates to going against, what ends up being a Herculean threat, the People's Republic of China moving forward? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each one of the panel members who have tremendous expertise. There's Mr. Michael Schwille, Senior Policy Analyst at RAND. We have Brigadier Veronique Malone from the United Kingdom, and she's the Deputy J2 of USCENTCOM, so another combatant command leader. Dr. Kristian Gustafson, also from the United Kingdom, Program Director for Intel and Security Studies at Brunel University in London. Mr. Bill Garrity, retired Navy commander, a good friend of mine. He is the Cyber Course Director at JSOU, but he also was our Joint Intelligence Center Director across the street at USSOCOM. And then another good friend of mine, Mr. Vic Garcia, who is a retired Army colonel and a longtime psychological operations officer and information ops practitioner, and someone who I hold in high regard as it relates to this particular effort. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Schwille. And the reason why I'm doing that is because there's a RAND research paper that Mike was the co-author for, and I think really sets the foundation for this conversation. It was published in the 2019-2020 timeframe, and it's intelligence support for operations in the information environment. So a lot of what we're going to discuss will probably be extracted or amplified from Mike's thought piece. So without further ado, over to you, Mike.
Great. Hey, thanks, Keith. And thanks, JSOU, for having me today. I'm really excited to kind of talk about some of this research. Like Keith mentioned, we conducted this back in 2018, 2019, and I think it was released in 2020. And while it's getting almost 5 years ago at this point, many of the issues and challenges that we identified in that report are still applicable today. First thing, let me just kind of maybe apologize in advance. I'm sure I will at some point in time say information operations or information advantage. So I'm broadly speaking about two communities here, right? The intelligence community and then the information community. So if I use one of those maybe older terms, I'd apologize. So as Keith mentioned, right, he asked me here today to kind of provide an overview of intelligence support to information and to help set the stage for the other panel members to kind of expand upon. So this report was generally focused at the geographic combatant command level, but it is widely applicable. It's specifically to the larger SOF community. And so while we found some organizations have a better handle on intel support to operations in the information environment, really across the board, while there were some pockets that were good, there was a lot of friction over responsibilities for the collection, analysis, and processing of information. And so for this work, right, we reviewed over 300 documents, we talked to more than 60 personnel, talked to 20 different organizations, pretty much equally between the intel community and the information community. And we broke this down into about more than 40 specific issues, which we categorized into 6 broad categories. And then we identified more than 70 individual solutions, which we bucketed into 4 individual categories. So taken together, both the issues and the solutions kind of really gives a good breadth of the problem space. So let me dive into these here. And so I'm just going to stay at the very, very high level here. So the first issue that identified was really talking about division of labor. And this primarily talked about the challenges that focus on the tensions between who should be responsible and for what tasks, right? So it really looked at the key, spanning the differences of opinions regarding responsibility for information fusion, expectations of analytic rigor, and kind of staffing decisions on who's going to do that work. The second category looked at missing expertise, and it really looked at, it concerns the gaps in skills and knowledge necessary to complete these tasks related to intelligence support to operations in the information environment. And the third category really was a prioritization category, and issues in here really stem from a failure to sufficiently prioritize operations in the information environment within a command or within another organization. The fourth category really looked at coordination and collaboration. I'm sure as most people on this call today realize that these are separate communities and they come from different places. They have different training, have different kind of expectations. And so many of the challenges here really focused on integrating these two communities together And it really stems from a lack of mutual understanding and either undeveloped or non-existent relationships. This category also looked at process immaturity. And while, again, we did find pockets of organizations where there were good processes, even in those cases, oftentimes processes would break down. The fifth category was looking at gaps in concepts or doctrine. And so when doctrine and concepts are in a state of flux, as in this particular space that we're talking about today, practice is inevitably going to lag. And so this category tried to capture some of that. The last category for issues and challenges was looking at intelligence oversight. And so within this category, it really looked at intelligence authorities and the rules and oversight mechanisms that apply to the wider defense intelligence enterprise. However, they also affect information personnel as well. And so some of the issues in this category, we're looking at the difference between monitoring in the information environment versus engaging in that space. And then talking about open source research, who can conduct open source research for what reasons versus who can conduct open source intelligence. And so with a understanding of these 6 categories of issues, we then went and identified 4 primary categories of solutions. And those are improving processes, prioritizing support, training and education, and allocating personnel. And so both the Intel and the IO communities kind of have an equal part to play here. And so we identified these solutions and kind of lumped them into either the IO community or the intelligence community. However, there's also other organizations and individuals that need to be part of the solution space here. And those are individuals such as commanders or the larger intelligence enterprise, the services themselves, and then institutions that conduct training in this space. So the first solution was looking at improving processes. And here we look to address the challenges that expose shortcomings or deficiencies in existing processes. And so from the IO kind of perspective, we looked at one example would be maybe to better be able to write and to scope out intelligence requests for information or intelligence requests. From the intelligence side or the community, one of the solutions was looking to maybe provide some more extensive analysis of that information environment, or maybe perhaps produce serialized reporting that could then be searched specific to OIE. The second category of solution was looking at prioritizing support. And here, effective support, while it's incumbent upon both of these communities, but it really kind of comes down to the commander or the command climate, as well as institutional or operational priorities. The third category we had was looking at training and education. And clearly both the IO and the intelligence personnel need additional training in this space to increase their knowledge base. So for the IO personnel, for example, solutions included training on RFI writing, or the inclusion of an IO training objectives for exercises. For the intelligence community, the need perhaps to better understand the needs of what the IO community is and how they can leverage their skills as intelligence professionals to assist those IO professionals. The last category is looking at the allocation of personnel. And this really looked at the solutions here focused on near-term personnel shortages rather than the longer-term creation of a body of intelligence and IO personnel dedicated specifically to OIE. And so solutions in this category really address leveraging existing personnel within commands in creative ways. So such as creating cross-functional teams, the use of LNOs, some different things like that. So I'll stop talking there. I know we have limited time here. I hope I set the stage for the rest of the panelists to kind of talk about. If you're interested in more of the solutions or challenges, that space, you can certainly dive deeper. Just take a look at the report. So thanks.
Hey, thanks, Mike. I really do appreciate it. And now we'll go out to Brigadier Vero. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to join you today, both as a British embed here in CENTCOM and as an intelligence professional, looking at it really through that lens from the intelligence side of things. I've just spent the last couple of years up at US Cyber Command and have really seen that influence and information versus the intelligence community, how a lot of work is being done to bring that together, but how there are still really enduring challenges. I think we've really heard there some good specific examples and suggestions on what those two communities need to do together as we move forward, and maybe think about what that means for the special operations community as well. It seems, as an intel officer, it seems pretty obvious, why we need that intel support. I think we've spoken earlier about being in a saturated information environment. There's open source, publicly available information, media commentators, civilian organizations such as Bellingcat and good old Joe Public on social media, who can get us information very quickly. And I think both in the influence and in the SOF world, it can be frustrating if the intelligence community can't turn that around quickly enough to drive quite fast-moving information. But there's still an important role for evaluated, properly assessed intelligence that supports. And we really need to get that right now to compete credibly with our strategic adversaries, as we heard earlier. So, we're really talking about the cognitive domain here. But again, it was alluded to earlier, we need to be able to do this across all the domains. Intelligence, we're used to intelligence supporting the physical domain and even now beginning the cyber domains, but thinking about what that means in the cognitive domain, and it does all need to be wrapped together. On the intel side, we're trying to make sense and we're trying to understand and provide that sense making and understand to the community. For the influence community to be effective, they need to deeply understand the target audiences. They need to know how they really think and get insights into what they intend to do in order to be able to shape and tailor influence activities and messaging accordingly. And another critical role is at the other end of the process, really. It's the measuring the effectiveness. Strategic messaging may well generate quite a strong response from our adversaries, but that will just be their own strategic messaging. How do we get the inside line? How do we get intel to know the internal reactions as well and do that comparison, which then drives the next set of operations? We've had a disconnect between those two communities for quite a while. It's resulted in a lack of robust intel support and actually a degree of mistrust over time and a bit of squabbling over who collects and who analyzes. And that's something we need to resolve. And we've heard from our previous speaker some steps towards doing that. A couple of reasons for that. The intel community quite rightly has to consider intelligence gains and intelligence losses. The intelligence community and the special ops community work hard to gain accesses and sources. And there's an understandable resistance against potentially compromising those if we share the intel with our adversary. After all, if we blow our sources of intel in an attempt to influence and deter, and that deterrence doesn't work, we risk being blind as we find ourselves in the fight moving forward. And that second half of that, or the other side of the coin, I suppose, is the influence community has been very wary of tainting their activities with what's often perceived as nefarious covert intel activity. I think a lot of that particularly over the last 20 to 25 years, whether it's the Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, is driven by the fact that we are often influencing into civilian communities, aid organizations, multinational partners, and we want to sort of keep that messaging clean. But things are changing. I mean, we have seen, as an example from my own army, the British Army, we used to have the PSYOPs function within the Military Intelligence Brigade. That was very much parceled off separately to 77 Brigade and very, very, in a policy way, completely separated away from the ISR Brigade. And that's had a detrimental effect. So, because there hasn't been that close link between the two communities. So a few final thoughts, really. What's key is we are also seeing how intelligence is not just supporting influence operations, it's being used as a tool in its own right for influence operations. We see that all the time as part of Ukraine. We saw it in the UK in 2018 when the government very much pushed out secret intelligence after the Novichok poisonings in Salisbury as a way to really galvanize the international community. And there were a mass of extraditions of Russian diplomats across various countries after that. That was very powerful. And we've seen other instances before. But we do need, if we're going to use the intel in that way to influence, we're going to have to keep the credibility of the intelligence community. You know, perhaps for all of us, following the 2003 invasion of Iraq, questions about reporting on weapons of mass destruction, public opinion was pretty low. Would we have been able to do the sort of activities now with credibility that we're able to do at the moment? There are two aspects to that. There's making sure we keep those accesses and sources, where very much the SOF community comes into that element to support, but also how the intelligence community themselves help fact check public disclosure of our adversaries and the wider environment that's out there. So really to finish off, you know, we talk about definitely bringing those two communities together. If we're really wanting to use influence to directly deter some of our competitors, which is what we're getting after here, really, the coercive disclosure, which was a term used in the article, War on the Rocks article, which really cited some of the Israeli examples of pinpointing Hezbollah sites to deter their activities, or highlighting Iranian weapon proliferation in Lebanon and Yemen. Even last month, we saw an article in the Wall Street Journal publicly declaring the Saudis as having shared intel with the US to warn of imminent attacks in the kingdom and what that might mean. So really, it's the credibility of the follow-on activity of our influence, how we can do that, how we can make sure that if we use influence, we can follow it up with something else, and maintaining the credibility of that information that we are using. And that really means that those two communities need to be close together. That's it from me. I'll pass on to my other panelists.
Thanks, Brigadier. Really appreciate it. And we will go out to Kristian. Over to you, sir.
So I'm approaching this as an intelligence methodologist and someone who teaches analysts. And so I'll start with saying there's a thing we know from research that was conducted by Rob Johnson at CIA in the US, and that is analytical teams work better when they are mixed, when they're the UK term, and maybe it's one common in the US as well, as tiger teams. So when you mix both deep professionals and deep subject matter experts with intelligence methodologists and other general analysts, and that's generally viewed as best practice. So take that as a starting point. Now, the point of military intelligence from the UK perspective, and I'm sure it's shared with yours, is to, as we often say it, reduce decision maker uncertainty. So we have complex situations where they're to reduce the boss's uncertainty. But I guess what I'd like to point out is in some, especially in human political situations, messy situations in which we are trying to have influence, we don't go to the nice parts of the world to do this very usually. We're going to the particularly crappy ones where things are messy. And in those situations, reducing decision maker uncertainty is not always easy, or actually, I would argue, always desirable. Sometimes you want to raise the decision maker's uncertainty. The thing you think you understand about the situation is actually not completely correct. So that's to say that defense may not always be able to maintain within its own house, so to speak. And I mean, I'm speaking from experience, closely being part of myself, but also allied in my university role to UK defense. But I'm sure it applies for you as well, that we can't always maintain the deep expertise in-house. But you sometimes need that deep expertise to help make sense of those very complex situations. I will also add that, and this is something, when I was writing, I was on the writing team for the UK Intelligence and Understanding Doctrines. And one of the things we tried to convey in that is that developing understanding of complex situations is not fast, it's not easy, and it's not solely in the realm of intelligence either. You cannot collect your way to understand situations. Often you need to have other kinds of information coming in, and it has to be something that's involving both the operators who are going into that situation, the commanders, and the intelligence personnel. So that presents a problem. Some of you will know the term of the Dunning-Kruger problem. Often it's used sort of humorously to point out that it's the stupid people who are the most confident, but it's like a more complex thing than that, in that when you start learning something, you can quite quickly, you start quite confident when you know less, and then you can get to a point where you think, okay, I think I've got this, but that can be a dangerous level of having a little bit of knowledge and presuming you have more. So there's the risk of what we call being on Mount Stupid. So how does SOF avoid that? Because SOF is often, or generally, working in compartmented situations. It's working in very secret things. So the UK had a good think at that. Part of the solution has been in the creation of specialist groups. The specialist groups are sitting in intelligence, but they also occur in engineering and some other bits of the world, including cyber and information. And those groups, quote unquote, bring the outside in by employing and recruiting people with international levels of expertise in a particular topic into a defense environment. Now, we don't put them through boot camp. We don't want to have them have rifles, but we put them in a situation where they are wearing a rank and a uniform and are vetted, and that's the key aspect, so that they, now the one I'm most familiar with is called Specialist Group Military Intelligence, and it's been effectively an intelligence consultancy for defense, and the principal customer for the last 3 or 4 years has been UKSF and SOF, because often they're looking at these deeply complex situations and realizing that they don't have enough knowledge in-house to be able to riddle out the right answer. Who am I going to influence? What levers do we need to push? Who is the center of this tangled web of people? Now, that's paid dividends. A couple examples was a young lieutenant I worked with who was also a PhD expert in traditional Arabic jurisprudence. Another gentleman I know is in the security sector, in the resource sector in the UK, and his work takes him to West Africa for 7 or 8 months out of the year. And both of these individuals have been really frequent consultants, effectively, to the UK SOF capacities in their various ways, and extremely successful at helping shape operations. Those people would not have been vetted and able to consult on the timelines they did had those specialist group systems not existed. Brigadier Veronique mentioned 77 Brigade, which is our influence one. They likewise have a large component of specialist reservists, so probably not enough intelligencers. Now, going back to the bit about methodological teams or intelligence teams, is the trick is getting those deep experts to talk Army, and to that extent, it's always been necessary to have those mixed teams include intelligence methodologists. And that's where I've often come into the game as an intelligence methodologist, so structured analytical methodology, providing auditability, providing structure, providing the frameworks that analysts can work on after that initial Tiger team work on solving the problem has been sorted, it's validated, it's sound analysis. And just to conclude then, is that provides the structure for those sometimes quite wacky deep experts. And that's really what you want. I mean, intelligence is not a space for cowboys, but it does have a lot of room and really benefits from having mavericks, that is, disruptive, non-conforming thinkers, as long as that information can be structured in such a way that it's usable by the operators. So having those Tiger teams with the operators, the analysts, the deep experts, that's the way ahead. You have to figure out how to build that so it's responsive. That's me. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks.
Hey, Kristian, thanks very much. I appreciate it. We'll kick it out to Bill, and just keep in mind, we got Bill and Vic left. We got about less than 20 minutes, and we still want to make sure we get at least 1 or 2 questions in. So over to you, Bill.
All right, thank you, sir. I will make this quick. I'm going to dive in a little bit on intel support to what I broadly call influence operations in cyberspace, and give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about from both maybe the blue and the red side, and then talk about intel support in general to making those type of operations happen. The first example I would call is precision delivery. A recent example in the news was a US government entity reportedly delivered recruitment messages to the Russian embassy in DC. And they did that by geofencing to add IDs on devices targeting Facebook, Twitter, and various Google advertisements to offer up the opportunity for the folks at the embassy to come to the US government with information if they felt like it. Of course, the Russians called it ridiculous and an attempt to sow confusion, but that's a great opportunity in the influence world. Another example of non-precision delivery would be the anonymous hack of Russian state TV recently, where they put in place their footage of operations, Russian operations in Ukraine, and their results. So that's kind of a non-precision delivery of influence to a large audience. The next area would be online persona operations, and the Russians have done this for a long time. If we go back to the 2016 elections and what they attempted to do, in 2018, the Department of Justice indicted 18 individuals and the Internet Research Agency in Russia. And part of that indictment said the defendants, posing as U.S. persons and creating false U.S. personas, operated social media pages and groups to attract U.S. audiences. We've seen the results of all the Department of Justice investigations and the indictments, but the U.S. intelligence community concluded that the tools to carry out this type of operation were multifaceted, and they used online messaging, they used online persona operations, covert intelligence operations, really meaning cyber operations, with the overall effect of combining Russian government entities, third-party entities, and paid social media users or trolls to execute their influence campaign. Another example of an online cyber type operation in the influence realm, and increasingly we're seeing more of this, is doxing, or what you hear referred to as exfil, where the bad guys get into your system via cyber means, gather documents, and then either threaten to expose them or expose them to just affect the population's opinion of that entity. An example would be the Panama Papers recently, and then in 2020, the Iranian effort to influence the US elections, where they used cyber means to access voter registration logs and then individually emailed folks and broadly emailed folks to counter the message that was being put forth in the US. In addition, they operated an online website using the information to expose what they perceive to be inequities in the system. All these types of operations from an intelligence perspective, whether you're the bad guy intel operator or the US or coalition intel operator, requires all source analysis. And it goes through all the steps of the traditional targeting cycle to include target development, weaponeering, execution, and then BDA. No one intel source is the key to all these. It takes all source analysis. A good start is open source information. We've heard that discussed today, having a robust OSINT capability within your command. But it also requires SIGINT and HUMINT to help ensure that that one intel source is not going to bite you in the end. What is critical to all this, and what I found out over the years in all my various positions, is what I call knowledge management. And really that is, how do you acquire data? How do you bring it together? How do you process it? And then how do you get it to the customer, whatever that customer might be, to achieve the objective they're trying to achieve in the end? It was mentioned earlier today in a different terminology of federating data and access to data. And that is really the key from an intel perspective. Brigadier talked about it a little bit. It was mentioned by some of the other panel members, but access to data and combining the data in a smart manner requires more than just the IC. It requires bringing in subject matter experts, cultural experts, data management experts, et cetera, so that you can mine the data and get to where you want to go. Back in the day, I used to go to folks and talk about organizations are building Whopper computers. And what I meant by that, it's a reference back to the old War Games movie, is commands would spend money and to access data and build a standalone capability. I always ask the question, well, who's building Burger King? Who's going to combine all the Whopper computers to get us to where we need to be? So we have a holistic understanding. We have made incredible advances in the last 10 to 15 years in that regard, and I think we're much better at it today. But as I mentioned, the intel community could only do its a small part of that. It takes a team of efforts, a team of experts rather than subject matter experts to pull us together, especially in the cyber realm. In the cyber realm, I used to say a lot that I've met the enemy and it's us. And I say that tongue in cheek because of the bureaucracy that we have to deal with. But there's a reason for that bureaucracy. It's because we are a nation of laws and we operate by our code of conduct. Lieutenant Corey Simpson, Army JAG, uses a great acronym in cyber operations and he calls it CRAMP. And that is you need the capabilities, you need the resources, meaning the people, the authorities, the mission, and the permission to execute. That's a difficult egg to crack, but we're much better at it today than we were in the past. Does this mean that we can't execute these top operations? No. What it means is we need to be innovative. We need to bring in the young folks, as mentioned earlier, and the subject matter experts, and we need to bring passion to our operations, and we need to operate within the law. The interagency and our partners across the coalition and allied nations are key to this. A great example is Operation Glow and Symphony back in 2016, where we went and targeted ISIS media architecture and influenced the populations globally by basically replacing their media content with our media content. Glowing Symphony was kind of a Super Bowl event in influence operations, combining kinetic, cyber, and MISO type operations. And I believe we're getting much better at it today. And I think the future is bright, and I'll stop my comments there.
Thanks very much, Bill. I appreciate it. And we'll go to Vic to take us home. If you could take about 5 or 6 minutes, Vic, and then we'll open up for questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I really appreciate being a part of this panel today. Quickly, I'm Colonel Vic Garcia, retired 30-year Army career. Last 2 assignments was as the J39 Chief of Information Operations, U.S. Central Command and U.S. Special Operations Command. This day, December 7th, is the day that will live in infamy and is a historical reminder of what happens when we don't focus our intelligence lens in the right locations. As a longtime influence practitioner, I hope I can bring some perspective to what we need for support from the intelligence community and provide some recommendations for intel support to operations in the information environment for the future. I'd like to start with a question for the audience. Can you name a military operation that does not routinely receive intelligence support? From my experience, there's only one, and that's information operations. Now, that's a general statement, but I would argue largely accurate. I'm not trying to lay blame. What I'm trying to highlight is the need for cultural change in education and training across the national security communities. And I mean everyone. Commanders establish intelligence priorities. Intel professionals need training in how to support operations in the information environment. And information practitioners need training in how to request intelligence support and how to best make use of that support once they receive it. Here I give credit to the Army's Cyber Center of Excellence, particularly for some of the emerging doctrinal thought that's coming out of the center, specifically the idea of the pseudo loop: sense, understand, decide, act, assess, in order to gain information advantage, both technically and cognitively. The challenge for the intel community has been how to collect in support of cognitive requirements. And I'd like to offer a few recommendations using this pseudo construct. For sense and understand, gaining situational understanding and awareness of what is happening in the information environment. And yes, this means open source. What our strategic competitors are doing is to gain the trust, legitimacy, and ultimately being able to sway foreign public opinion in support of their strategic objectives. And that's ultimately what we are in competition over: public opinion of foreign audiences. And so our intel lens cannot just be focused on our adversaries or our competitors. We need intel support to gain understanding of these populations we are in competition over. For decide and act, who are the key influencers in these societies? How do we gain access to and gain the trust of these influencers? How can we empower them to act if they share our common objectives? in essence, we need intel support to more thoroughly develop our target audience analysis. Finally, intelligence support is critically important during the assess phase. Ultimately, we are trying to influence foreign audience behaviors, and behaviors are observables that can be collected upon. And so what I'd like to do now is just give a quick vignette from a personal experience that I had going back to Iraq 2007. I was the commander of the IO task force supporting multinational forces Iraq. One of our lines of effort was to erode the support of the Iraqi Sunni population and that population's support for AQI. We had an enduring campaign, sustained messaging over satellite TV, radio, and other means. And as a result of that, I organized a weekly targeting meeting where we invited intel analysts to attend and be part of the discussions. And during the discussions, we would speak about our lines of efforts and really look at the quantitative and qualitative research that we were conducting, the surveys and focus groups, but always fell short really in getting intelligence feedback from those intel analysts. But what we saw was that over time, the light bulbs went off. The intel analysts started to understand the objectives we were trying to pursue, and they started to feed back to us regular intelligence reporting that normally would have laid on the floor of the cutting room, within the ACE. And so we started to get those reports, the indications that the Sunni Iraqi nationalist fighters were becoming disaffected with AQI. We received things like radio intercept reports where AQI senior leaders were asking for more funding because all of their Iraqi supporters had walked away, had mutinied. We received interrogation reports, and one particular detainee report we received in very colorful language talked about how that detainee came to recognize that AQI wasn't working in support of the Iraqi nationalist objectives, and even closed with using our own tagline, the messaging tagline that we used in our television commercials. So in the regular reporting that I did up, and I had to personally brief General Petraeus on a monthly basis. Previously, I would show him some of our products. I would show him the results of our traditional research. And he was always interested, but never really took notes. When I started to integrate in the intelligence reporting into that as well, that was the first time that I saw General Petraeus open his little black notebook and start to take notes of what was happening in the environment. And this was before the Sunni turn. This was when we were starting to really highlight that there was changing happening with the Sunni population. So I thought that was significant, and I know we're pressed for time, so I hope that was illustrative of what we can do when we're working together as a team. Thanks, Keith. Back over to you.
Thank you very much, Vic. I appreciate it. Wraps it up nicely. So we've got probably about 5 minutes for questions, and we do have a couple in the hopper. One was asked, why is OSINT not an accepted INT or separate discipline, intel discipline, at least in the U.S. arsenal? And I would say it is. And that's the direction we've been going in now for the last 3 or 4 years. And it's a shared responsibility between the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency as it relates to open source intelligence, not necessarily publicly available information or commercially available information. But so everyone recognizes the fact that OSINT is really the quickest way to share information. Now, having said that, there are still restrictions. In many cases, it could be for official use only. That caveat alone really sort of requires it go through a foreign disclosure scrub. So we still have a ways to go as it relates to trying to rapidly share information with our closest partners. The whole no foreign thing still exists and still creates a significant challenge for us, even though we've made progress. The IC has made progress in that regard. The other question that was asked was, what's our perspective of the RAND paper that Mike had co-authored that laid out all these problems that we do face from an intelligence perspective in the information environment? And what grade would you give sort of the Intel community in that regard? Now, I'm going to take that one only because I've been doing this for 43 years, and I'm going to say it's a C+. And the reason why I say that is because the Intel community recognizes the shortfall. They recognize the fact that we have entrenched cultures that preclude us from sharing information rapidly, that we rely too much on traditional collection activities, that our analysts probably aren't aware enough to be able to discern between what's happening from competition to crisis to confrontation to conflict. It's a very difficult issue and requires constant education and training. I think they also realize that they've been somewhat risk averse. And that's kind of the human condition that we've heard about for the last day and a half, that people just don't want to put it out there and be wrong. So it's easier to sort of retract and maybe vanilla the estimate in order to get it through the various agencies and organizations that we have out there. The last question we have, and maybe I can throw it out there for the next couple of minutes, is how can Intel benefit by shared practices in process improvement across agencies, organizations, and formations? And I'm going to throw that to Kristian, since he had mentioned the process improvement issue. You got a couple of minutes to address that, Kristian.
So I worry sometimes about use of process when we're talking about improving intelligence function, because actually the process isn't what gets you good intelligence. It's insight, and it's it's human creativity, and processes are not superb at fostering human creativity. What you want in intelligence is you want a big enough box that you can think outside the box inside of, if that makes any sense. So there has to be if you want saleable intelligence answers, functioning actionable intelligence answers to complex problems, there needs to be a bit of room for creative thought. There needs to be some disruptive thinking, and that's not easy to attain in very large organizations, but you can sometimes with the right human resource ideas or the right intelligence, building your teams the right way, get organizations which can produce good, actionable, well-written, convincing intelligence, but at the same time allow in the back end space for creative and disruptive thinking. And that's I think that is going to depend a lot on the character of the leaders of those organizations who are willing to allow some intelligence mavericks to have a bit of thinking time. So complex, but doable. And I think it comes down to something that underlines all military things, which is really solid leadership. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kristian. I appreciate it. Okay, so thanks very much to the panel, the panelists. We really do appreciate the opportunity to present this, which I think is one of the major challenges we face across the department, is Intel support to influence activities and being able to do it right. Now, I'll leave the audience with the fact that it's all based on requirements. Intel is driven by requirements. Whatever comes in, that's what these analysts, collectors, and practitioners will turn to in order to collaborate, synchronize, and deconflict activities in the intelligence arena, certainly towards influence operations. So that's what we have. I think we're time out here. So I'll turn it back over to Doug. Thank you, Doug.
So thanks again to all of our panelists, the moderator, Keith Lawless, former Deputy JSOU of SOCOM and one of our JSOU faculty, Brigadier General Veronique Malone from the UK, who's the Deputy JSOU of CENTCOM, Dr. Michael Schwille, who's coming to us from RAND, Bill Garrity from here at JSOU, Kristian Gustafson from Brunel University in London, and our friend Vic Garcia from Paraton.